I hadn't slept all night because of my longing to go to Chisapani. In the morning, Father was drinking tea in the kitchen, and I told him, "Ba, today I'm going to Chisapani." "Why do you have to go to Chisapani?" Father glanced quickly at me. "To see the bridge." I scratched the ground with my thumb. "Everyone else has been." Father took a slurp of tea and swallowed it. Then he threw me a 20 note that he had just taken out of his waistcoat pocket, and I nearly jumped for joy. I grabbed the note and held it tightly in my fist. Just as I was leaving, Father said, "Listen, don't wander off the path, and come back quickly." "All right," I said quietly, and went downstairs. Mother, who was dusting medicine bottles in the medical, also gave me 10 rupees. "Don't spend too much," she told me. So I had 30 rupees, and I went to Chauraha, jumping about like a young goat. Ekraj was waiting for me impatiently. It was he who told me, "Dost, they say the Prime Minister will come to inaugurate the bridge." Ekraj had been impatient to set out since early that morning. If we arrived late, we wouldn't get in. There was going to be a terrible press of people there. We needed to get to stand in the front before the crowd had grown too big. Otherwise, we wouldn't get to see the Prime Minister close up. Glasses had been smashed during a discussion of this Prime Minister in Ekraj's tavern the night before. Table legs had been broken too. That's why it seemed to Ekraj that the Prime Minister must be an important man. And the radio mentioned his name 100 times a day. Prime Minister Girija Prasad Koirala said this. Prime Minister Girija Prasad Koirala said that. According to Ekraj, the Prime Minister ate his rice with a golden spoon. Large groups of people had left Katase for Chisapani first thing that morning. Sharma uncle, Bhakte, the bank manager, Ome, everyone. The ASI had been in Chisapani for the past 3 days. It was as if a great fair was taking place at Chisapani. People walked along chattering excitedly, scaring the monkeys that sat up in the branches of the trees with their noise. They wanted to see the Karnali Bridge, a bridge taller than a mountain. If you looked up at the top of the bridge, your hat fell off, I had heard. Ekraj and I were walking along quickly. Dost, the Amori Kola goes to Katase from here, Ekraj told me. I stopped to look, and for the very first time I saw the Amori Kola splitting from the Karnali where it led up to Matera. Where the rivers parted, there was a bank of boulders bound with wires. The wide blue rushing water of the Karnali foamed and became cloudy after the Amori Kola entered it as it reached Matera. Otherwise, how peaceful the Karnali was. It shivered and shook gently when the wind stepped lightly onto it before passing on its way. How wide was the Karnali? It was wider than the eyes could contain. It escaped from the rims of your eyes and ran off into the distance. Sometimes the breeze that blew along it would scatter sand into your eyelids. It made my eyes prickle, but still I had to sit on the bank and watch this Karnali. Like the white egrets flying along on the other side, the Karnali too had to fly up to touch the shoulders of those hills that stood along its banks. They had no colour in them. It had all faded away completely. Let's hurry, Dost! Ekraj startled me, and the spell was broken. After midday, the wind had begun to blow as if it would blow the hills away. We had to reach still further up, from where a faint smell of oranges was coming down towards Katase. Dost, everyone has gone already, shouted Ekraj, standing between two huge boulders. His voice echoed off the boulders to reach me. Ekraj and I ran. Like a kite, a helicopter circled the hills of Chisapani. Patatata. What a loud noise it made, as if it would bring down the hills. It turned when it reached the hill I could see from Kairifanta, the one that looked like an old man laughing. A huge crowd of people ran towards the bridge, most of them Haterus. The police stood at the entrance to the bridge, sweating hard as they pushed the crowd back. Wherever you turned, there were people. I got caught up in the crowd, panicked by the smell of its sweat, the helicopter circling like a kite above my head. I found it difficult to breathe. One person's elbow shoved me backwards. My earlobes began to burn as they were scraped by one elbow after another. First, one elbow pushed me, then another, and I found myself ejected from the crowd. The helicopter settled onto the ground on the far side of the bridge, making dust fly up into the air. Its noise, which was so loud it had almost been splitting the hills, shut down. The sweating crowd parted, then came together again. I stood on top of a tall rock. Lines of people stood on the other rocks around it, craning their necks to see to the other side of the bridge, and I did the same. Where was Ekraj? Ekraj was nowhere to be seen in the suffocating crowd. Was he pressed inside it, or could he have gone ahead? Later, he would tell me a mixture of truth and fiction. "Look over there," shouted a thin, tall man standing on top of a high rock. "Did you see the Prime Minister?" I'd stretched up, standing on tiptoe. "Seems like he's gone to look." All I could see in that direction was a mass of people's heads like black lentils, which all seemed to be swaying. Suddenly, a faint sound of applause began to come from the far side of the Karnali. As it grew in volume and reached the crowd on the near side, that crowd began to applaud too. One of the pairs of clapping hands was mine. Then the heads on the far side shook and moved to the far end of the bridge where they could no longer be seen. The bridge had been inaugurated now, and a jeep drove across it for the first time. The applause was so loud it made my ears itch. The white egrets on both sides of the river were startled into the air, and they flew up and turned into clouds. The Prime Minister made his way back to the helicopter. The noise of the helicopter came again, "Buttututu," and the dust flew. The helicopter circled over the shoulders of the hills and disappeared behind a high mountain. The crowd dwindled away like dust, and the police who had stood there sweating now squatted down beside the bridge. Ekraj emerged, drenched in sweat and straightening his dishevelled hair. He hesitated for a moment. "Oi, Ekraj!" I cried. He grinned when he saw me squatting like a langur on top of the tall boulder. I hurried down, nearly slipping on the way. "Did you notice, Dost? The Prime Minister was wearing gloves," he told me. "When he took them off, his hands were as white as milk." Could he see gloves on the Prime Minister's hands from so far away? I was hardly going to believe that. There were fewer people beside the bridge now, and the few that remained were regarding it with wonder, sometimes looking up and sometimes down. How tall its pillars were, Babe! If you looked up at them, the sun dazzled your eyes. The bridge lay there, stretched out over the river. From the very next day, buses and trucks would be crossing the Karnali on it. I gazed across it one more time. The road that joined the bridge on the other side turned by some tree saplings where it was blocked off. I suddenly recalled Father telling me that the road went to Nepalganj. "Do you know where that road goes, Dost?" Ekraj too was looking over to the far side, shading his narrowed eyes with his right hand. "To Nepalganj." "No, Dost. If you go straight, the road leads to Kathmandu." Ekraj watched the road for a while, lost in thought, and I did the same. Then Ekraj lowered his hand. Dost, do you know? The Prime Minister lives in that Kathmandu, they say.